Let me give you a hypothetical scenario. Suppose you've got six Italian guys. Now, I'm not trying to single out a particular ethnicity. They just have to be Italian for this to make sense, so bear with me. Now, some of my best friends are Italian and all that. Anyway, they're all friends, and the first one smuggles contraband, the second one runs extortion rackets, the third is in charge of making unfortunate accidents happen to people when they don't pay up, and handing out naps with the fishes, if you catch my drift. And the fourth is in charge of the whole thing, right? That kind of sounds like the Mafia, right? But we've only talked about four so far. The fifth Italian guy doesn't do anything like the first four, right? He just runs a pizza shop. Now, sure, it's been in business for 30 years, despite never seeming to have any customers, and the first four guys are always hanging out in the back room for some reason. But, he just owns the restaurant, right? And the sixth guy has never committed a crime in his life. In fact, he even went to law school. Sure, he's always hanging out with the first four, and he defends them whenever they get in legal trouble, but he's never so much as jaywalked, right? So what does that sound like to you now? Does it sound like four mafiosos and then two upstanding citizens? Or is it just the mafia, but two of them have jobs that require them not to get personally involved in any sort of criminal activity in order to better serve the organization? I'm leaning towards the latter, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because GBS just put out a tier list of science-based content creators, and what I found really jarring about it was how many very high-tier influencers who are supposedly, spotless examples of integrity and accurate science communication are friendly with the low-tier dingbats who are making a mockery of scientific principles for views and profit. I mean, does that really make sense? That somebody who's genuinely committed to scientific principles, to communicating accurate information to the public would be in business with, on collabs with, on podcasts with people who are doing the exact opposite? That these supposed paragons would come to the defense of the ones who are doing wrong when they start to attract criticism from basically everybody else in the fitness industry. Does that really make sense? That's not really what I think of when I think of a principled scientist. I think of someone with an actual commitment to the truth, regardless of the consequences.
The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth, whether it's scientific truth or historical truth or personal truth. It is the guiding principle on which Starfleet is based. Now, if you can't find it within yourself to stand up and tell the truth about what happened, you don't deserve to wear that uniform.
So let's get into the structure of the science-based mafia. I'll first talk about the Goombas out there doing all the dirty work, and then we'll talk about the mob lawyers who defend them, right? We all know who the Goombas are who are doing the dirty work here in this analogy, right? It's Mike Israetel and Milo Wolf. I mean, those two they probably account for at least 80% of the criticism of science-based lifting just all by themselves. And we all know why, at least everybody outside their clique does, right? They're constantly saying this crazy out-of-pocket stuff. They're misrepresenting studies. They're giving outlandish bad advice. Don't do hammer curls. Leg extension is the worst exercise, all that stuff. They're clickbaiting, they're rage baiting. I'm not going to get into all of it here. I do have plenty of videos on it myself. Hell, Geoff himself has plenty of videos on it. A ton of people do at this point, right? I do want to point out really quick that the godfather, so to speak, of criticizing these dipshits, Lyle McDonald, just backed me up on one of these videos that I made. Remember how I roasted little Milo Wolf for fear-mongering people about losing fat too quickly because he doesn't know the difference between lean body mass and muscle tissue? I'll link it below. Anyway, Lyle just called his dumbass out for that too, so that was satisfying.
Now, lean body mass is not synonymous with muscle. Skeletal muscle is maybe 40 to 45% of your total lean body mass. Maybe up to 50 in elite athletes. The other is everything else. On any diet, you will lose lean body mass. Water, glycogen. If you take a big poo, that will show up as lean body mass loss. Underappreciated fact, a portion of fat cells is lean body mass. When you lose fat, your lean body mass goes down a little bit. The little Milo Wolf, among many others, doesn't understand the difference between lean body mass and muscle mass. And for someone who makes a big deal about his PhD, that's some kindergarten level ignorance.
So yeah, that felt nice. I mean, I knew I was right, obviously, but I think a lot of people weren't quite sure because they're not quite sold on my scientific credentials. Not that you have to be a rocket scientist to catch Milo being wrong. Anyway, vindication is nice. But unfortunately, what Milo Wolf and Mike Israetel do works really well for social media and business. The hype and rage bait gets them tons and tons of views. And a lot of that is hate views. I'm certainly guilty of that. And pretty much everyone serious with any experience in fitness realizes that these two are complete jokes. But unfortunately, all the algorithm traction that they get from this puts them in front of a bunch of naive kids who don't realize this, and thus they're still able to negatively influence a whole lot of people about the way they exercise and think about fitness, right? Now, in that last sentence, I said pretty much everyone with experience, but not everyone, right? And the reason I said that is because some allegedly serious people don't realize or won't admit that these two are jokes, absolute embarrassments to science, fitness, and everything else they're associated with. And unfortunately, some of these very people are in GBS's S tier. So let's start with Eric Helms. One of the science-based influencers, whenever we talk about like science-based influencers running amok and doing all these shenanigans, every time his name comes up as one of the good ones, right? And sure, if you just go off his own personal content that he puts out, that would be fine. Except that at every single opportunity, this bastion of scientific integrity, allegedly, defends Mike Israetel, right? Hell, some of the most out-of-pocket shit that Mike has ever said was on Eric's podcast. Like this particular gem of a clip I'm about to put up is made into virtually every roast of Mike for a reason.
You've never met anyone with as much willpower as me. And whatever it is you think you're good at in your life, I'd probably take about a year and become an authority in the field in which you think you're good.
And look who's sitting there listening, not pushing back in any way. Mr. Scientific Integrity himself, Eric Helms. One of the good ones until he wants the exposure boost that Mike brings. And in case anyone wants to say, oh yeah, well that was back in the day, Mike hadn't made as much of a fool of himself then. A, yes he had. He's been doing this for a while. And B, Eric has had plenty of opportunity since to acknowledge that Mike's shenanigans are a problem, and he has steadfastly refused to do that and continues to defend him. A little while back, friend of the channel, Brains and Gains, had Eric on and asked him about the recent criticism of science-based fitness. Now that would have been the perfect opportunity to, diplomatically of course, say that, yeah, Mike and Milo and maybe a few others have been causing problems recently, and some of the criticism of science-based lifting that they've generated is deserved, but that isn't representative of science-based fitness as a whole. That seems like something that a scientist with integrity, one of the good ones, might want to do, right? But instead, he took the opportunity to say that what they're doing is still overall a good thing because they're getting science in front of more eyeballs, basically.
Science as marketing, and it's become very trendy, and it's pissing people off. And it's kind of like, you got all the underground hip hop heads who are like, oh, what the fuck with this commercial rap,
Yeah.
But that also tells me that commercial rap is exploding, right? And ultimately, I'm not sure it's a bad thing that you can have a quote unquote science-based channel and have millions of followers. I think that's probably a better position than we were in 20 years ago.
Now, some people might just say, oh, Eric isn't a negative person. He's not going to call anyone out by name. That's just not the sort of thing that he does. He's above all that, right? And he does certainly like to present himself as being above it all, right? The only problem with that is he has no problem directly criticizing someone outside the clique who criticizes the clique.
I had Atlas Power Shrugged on recently, and he was very, going hard against certain science-based educators and whatnot. A few other people as well. So that's very broad, but maybe as somebody who's probably maybe one of the most well-known science-based advocates for bodybuilding, maybe you can kind of discuss some of the errors people are making when they're kind of lashing out against it.
I think another thing that is just going on in society generally is there's been a general mistrust of science and authority and public figures, and kind of the idea that you need to be skeptical, which I love, but skepticism from a place of ignorance and Dunning-Kruger and not knowing it. So, I think when you had Atlas Power Shrugged on, you were asking him, like, what did he see was wrong with some of the research? And I think this is true of a lot of people. It's not a critique of him, but he was like, well, these researchers not doing double-blind studies. And I'm like, how do you do a double-blind study in exercise science? Like, okay, you're going to be in the 40 set group. Don't count them, though, right? How many have you done? I have no idea. I'm blinded to this protocol, right? So we're talking about how, like, order effects aren't accounted for in crossovers. And I literally don't know how. That's the easiest thing to account for ever. If you do a crossover, you just randomize which one they do first. Then you have a washout. And that's done all of the time. So there is a certain element of, and someone who stated that they dropped out of a master's degree program, but learned a little bit about, study design. They took a class that they may or may not have finished on how does research work. It's exactly the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you learn a little bit, and that's helpful. I'm not advocating, just don't have any comments about research. Just let the researchers do it. Trust us. That's not what I'm advocating for, but I think you just have to be really aware that if you know a little bit about how you think something's supposed to operate, but you're actually missing some really big pieces of information, the messaging can be, we need to throw out all of science, and you're just missing out on a lot of information.
Now, I'm not going to respond to this here. If you want to see that, it's in my comments on that particular video, which I'll link down below again. For the purposes of this argument today, everything that he said about me can be true. I can be a midwit or whatever, that's fine. The point is that he's not above it. He's willing to directly criticize other people by name. He just chooses not to do it when it's anyone in his clique, no matter how obviously they're fucking up. And it's not just me. He's done the same thing with Lyle McDonald when Lyle deservedly criticized another clique member, Brad Schoenfeld's ridiculous volume study. So he is willing to attack people, just not anyone in his clique. Okay? Anyway, I'll ask you this. Is somebody who puts out very good content on his own channels, but then defends fuck-ups in his clique and attacks anyone who criticizes the clique, circles the wagons, defends obviously guilty friends, is that really a bastion of upstanding scientific integrity? Or is he more like the mob lawyer we talked about earlier, somebody who cultivates a good personal reputation so that he can then use it to defend his shadier friends whose reach he benefits from? It just doesn't make sense to me that somebody who defends, low-tier influencers, and by the way, I think Geoff was just being nice to Mike by giving him a C, I guess, based on his past content, and I think maybe out of pity. I think Geoff probably feels bad picking on somebody with such small arms, comparatively speaking. Mike actually deserves F tier, we all know that. But anyway, should somebody who defends him be so far apart from in terms of tiers? I don't think the way people operate that people with S tier integrity defend people with F tier integrity, or even C tier integrity for being super nice. Doesn't make sense to me. And very similar criticisms can be made of Jeff Nippert, and in fact I have done this in the past. Like, his own content is quite good. He's careful not to personally do a lot of the stuff that science-based influencers are getting criticized now for, and yet he's always defending science-based fitness from attacks, and he even has the guy who's generating all these criticisms, Mike Israetel, in his defense videos. I mean, how is that to be interpreted as anything other than a defense of Mike? If you know how to personally avoid doing all the bad things that Mike and Milo are doing, as he demonstrates in his own videos, how are you not able to recognize what they're doing as bad and avoid associating with them? I don't think Jeff has a confrontational bone in his body. I don't really expect to see him actually calling anyone out. But he could at least not lend his good reputation to the worst offenders in science-based by collabing with them, right? The worst part is he doesn't even need the reach. I mean, he has plenty on his own. I mean, either way, I just can't justify an S-tier rating for a guy who's constantly collabing with C-tier people. That's not how integrity works. On a similar note, we have Greg Nuckols, another guy whose name always comes up as one of the good guys. And again, this would be perfectly fine based on the content that he puts out personally. But the problem is, he's in business with Milo Wolf. They run Stronger by Science together, work together, So if Milo is saying some incorrect, misleading misrepresentations of science on Instagram on a page that they both share for their shared business, how does that not reflect on Greg? And yes, Milo's doing exactly that.
If you lose weight too fast, this could be you. But how fast is too fast? How quickly can you lose fat without also losing muscle? Well, that's what a meta-analysis by Murphy and Curler in 2022 sought to determine. They looked for all the studies that had participants perform a training routine and reported their calorie intake. The biggest deficit people could get away with without losing any muscle was only 500 calories per day.
It's crazy, right? I feel like it isn't a crazy stretch to say that should have some impact on Greg's reputation as well. Am I the crazy one here? I mean, come on, Jeff. You can't just say that, Greg was asleep when Milo posted that. He didn't know about it. He's still S tier. Sure, like the guy who runs the pizza shop for the Mafia that they use to launder their money, he's not as guilty as the guy who's out there actually breaking legs and dumping folks in lakes, but he's not completely innocent either. He's not an upstanding, S tier member of society, right? if Helms and Nippert are kind of the mob lawyers here, Knuckles is definitely the shady pizza shop owner. You can't pair one guy with a good reputation for scientific integrity who can't navigate social media with a guy who's really good at the social media algorithm but has no integrity and get a business that has great social media reach and a great reputation for integrity. That's not how integrity works. So in the Mafia analogy, Brad Schoenfeld, we'll call him the Godfather, he provides access to real scientific credentials for, younger influencers like, real university stuff in exchange for their support and reach, right? He's not the one out there doing a lot of the crazy stuff on social media, but if you want to see everybody in the clique abandon any kind of semblance of objectivity or scientific integrity and circle the wagons, just go ahead and criticize one of his lazy corner-cutting studies that, trust me, could not get punished or published, I apologize, in any other field. His studies, they're lazy. He cuts every corner he can. Show me one area where he went above and beyond. No. Now, I'm not going to get too far into that. I'll link one of Lyle's videos, but that's all I'll say on him. Let's get to probably the worst defender on this list. Lane Norton is a special case, and I would say he's the worst of the bunch morally. Unlike somebody like Jeff Nippert, who you don't really expect to see calling out bad actors anyway, Lane has built his reputation on being the guru buster. The expectation that he said is if somebody's out there on social media peddling something that isn't actually supported by scientific research, he's going to call them out. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing. It's a valuable role. We need that since there are so many grifters out there selling nonsense. But that position comes with greater responsibility and a big potential for misuse and corruption. And GBS pointed this out in fairness. So especially when you're as popular as Lane with millions of people, treating him as the final say on whether something is legit or not, there's an expectation that anyone he associates with is legit because if there was a problem, he'd call it out, right? So when we see this guy who loves nothing more than calling Paul Saladino a charlatan for selling overpriced animal powder, and for the record, Paul Saladino is a charlatan and the animal powder is overpriced. But then the same guy just happily goes on Andrew Huberman's podcast where Huberman advertises even more overpriced plant powder. The implication is that the plant powder must be legit, right? Because Lane would call it out if it wasn't. He's the guru buster, right? But of course, it's not. Not only is AG1, it's never been shown in any sort of studies to have any beneficial effects whatsoever, despite being like roughly the price of platinum by ounce. It was actually founded by a guy who is on the run from a massive real estate fraud scandal in New Zealand. He has open charges in New Zealand that he's on the run from. I think they don't have extradition for whatever reason here in the States. I'll link a video on that below. It's very interesting. But anyway, yeah. It's a little worse than Paul Saladino's stupid liver capsules. I'm not saying they're good. They're nonsense, but at least as far as I know, he's never committed real estate fraud. Now, anyway, if Jeff Nippert, for example, were to go on Andrew Huberman, I'd give him a pass. I'd assume he was just too Canadian, too polite to say no. He couldn't, you know what I mean, right? But it's a different situation with Lane because he's established himself as the guy that will call out grifters who need to be called out. And this is kind of where Jeff picked up on this, but I think he didn't go far enough with this. So let's bring back the Mafia analogy. In this analogy, he's kind of like the corrupt cop, the cop who's on the Mafia payroll, right? You look at a police chief, and 99% of the time in his precinct, he goes by the book, right? 99% of the time, his department arrests people that they believe are guilty and lets people that they believe are innocent go. He does it by the book 99% of the time. But one time, he railroads somebody that he knows is innocent and lets the guilty person go as a favor because the mob paid him, right? Do we say, overall, he has a great track record. There's just this one hiccup, so we're going to put him in B tier? Or do we send him to F tier jail? I think we all know where that belongs, right? That's not just a little minor hiccup, right? Again, to Geoff's credit, he mentioned the AG1 issue. He did. I just don't think he's, treating it with the severity that it deserves. And besides, Lane doesn't have a great track record anyway. If you've ever heard of anybody on Instagram talking about how it's possible to diet too hard to eat too few calories and actually damage your metabolism, metabolic damage, so that now you can actually get fat by eating 1,000 calories or whatever, You ever hear anybody talk about that? I still see it to this day, like fairly frequently. Yeah, anyway, that was Lane's dumbass who invented that, okay? He had zero controlled studies indicating that this was actually happening ever. No evidence, no scientific evidence, so to speak. But based on, according to him, hundreds of emails from physique competitors claiming that this is what was happening, he promoted the idea for years. Apparently made a good bit of money off it, from what I've heard. And the reality, of course, is that these people were just inaccurately counting their calories and eating way more than they thought they were, right? And Lane eventually realized that, and he did switch his tune, and now he won't say that anymore. But he never took responsibility, for starting that stupid myth in the first place, and unfortunately, it's still alive and well. Maybe it would help if he would take some accountability and say, "Hey, I screwed up. Now, like this is all on me. Now you guys stop saying it." But he's never taken accountability. Although, I mean, to be fair, like what kind of integrity and accountability do you expect from a guy who would leave his pregnant wife for a new girl, right? Probably not so much. Anyway, Lane belongs in F tier with his little buddy Huberman, who, by the way, just launched one of his own line of those stupid orange blue light blocking glasses that Lane actually likes to make fun of a whole lot whenever like Dave Asprey, who again is a grifter, but whenever one of these people wears the orange glasses, like Lane loves to make fun of it. And Huberman just launched his own his own brand after actually saying that they were not scientifically supported for years. I guess somebody finally got a big enough offer for him, and it would have to be a huge offer because this guy is absolutely raking cash. Anyway, I'm not going to go over everybody on GBS's list. I don't even know some of them, honestly. But those are the ones that I definitely think are in the wrong place when their associations are taken into account. And I do think you have to take that into account. Otherwise, it opens the door for exactly the sort of schemes that I've talked about here. You have one guy pull a bunch of shady stuff to get traction in the algorithm and make money, and then have another maintain a squeaky clean reputation to legitimize the operation, launder the money, so to speak, and then they shake hands and divide the profits later. Literally in the case of Milo and Greg, a little bit more figuratively in the case of the other members of this clique that I talked about, but not much. And not all the people on this tier list are in the cliques, which is why I didn't mention them. But anyway, yeah, I'm not going to get into everybody else on the list. I don't even know half of them, to be honest with you. So yeah, this is not, again, this is, and to be fair to GBS, he did mention the unwillingness to call out the worst offenders like Mike in his segment at the end of his bit on Mike. So if you watch the whole video, you'll see that. So he is aware of it. And, he's bringing attention to it in his video. So this is not an attack on him. I just think that stuff should be reflected in the rankings, which are a representation, of your reputation in the industry. I think your relationships and associations, especially business associations, should have an impact on your reputation. And that's why I made this video. So what do you guys think? Did I make my case? Is there anybody else I should have mentioned? Am I wrong about any of these guys? Let me know in the comments. So this is my first video back in a while, so I'll give you just a little bit of a personal update. So my wife and the baby boy are both very healthy. They're doing great. My little girls are doing a great job of being big sisters. That's awesome to watch. But obviously I've been pretty busy taking care of my family recently, hence the lack of updates and videos. So the plan I laid out in the last video, if you want to watch that, has been working really well, even better than expected. Despite obviously it not being a high priority, I've still managed to make surprisingly good physical progress, actually. Now, the upload schedule is still probably going to be intermittent for a while. I mean, not only do I have a lot going on, but I also have some big projects in the works behind the scenes. I'm pretty excited about that, so look for an update soon, but not quite ready to get that stuff out yet. Now, before I go, I do want to shout out my sponsor, Barbell Apparel. I mean, their jeans have, no joke, been really helpful for this whole last month. I mean, comfortable enough to sleep in at the hospital when you don't want to necessarily bring pajamas, get changed out because you have to, drive back home, put the kids to bed, come back, try to get your sleep whenever you can. I mean, it's when I take my kids out to go ride their scooters, I can get an impromptu jog in for some exercise, get some box jumps in on, when I'm out with them, because the same jeans I'm wearing all around are workout gear, you know what I mean? So that's been super helpful, and these are the ultimate dad jeans. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you like this, make sure to let the algorithm know that you did, because I haven't posted for a while, so I'll probably need all the help I can get. All right, thanks, guys.